your vantage point, which is up on the levee, which is where Highway 1 goes over the Morganza, and I'm probably, I would say, 3/4 of a mile, maybe as the crow flies, from the actual structure, maybe a little, somewhere between that and a half a mile away, and it is just an awesome sight to see. Again, the power of that river as it comes gushing through, it's sort of unleashed into the basin.
Wow. And when do they anticipate to open more bays? I know that he said, I know that the Major General and Colonel Ed Fleming talked about this being open possibly, potentially 3 weeks or so. When would they open or unleash more bays?
Well, it's basically a simple math thing. What they'll do is they'll decide, the standard is they want to keep 1.5 million cubic feet of water passing Baton Rouge. To use the Superdome analogy, this is rough math, so I'm not exact here, but that would be about enough water to fill the Superdome in, say, 45 or 50 seconds, in that range. And that's the standard that they use. When they reach that point, that is the point at which they operate the Morganza Spillway. We hit that point at Baton Rouge on the river this afternoon, right around 3 o'clock here, and that's why they have made this decision. So what they will try to do is the same thing they've done with the Bonnet Carré, which is to make sure that they don't, in the case of the Bonnet Carré, it's 1.25 million. So what they'll do is keep doing the math based on the flow rate that they get from the Corps engineers, from USGS, the Geological Survey, and they'll just simply keep opening bays to keep that flow at that level and not any higher. They anticipate that they will have to operate the Morganza Spillway at about 1/4 of its capacity, which I think that gets me back to the whole point that this is really a test of the levees. Do the levees hold up in the way as advertised, and in a way, frankly, to maybe soothe some concerns, in a way that they always have, going back to 1849, which is when we had the last levee break in the city of New Orleans in terms of a river levee. So what they'll do is, just as they did with the Bonnet Carré, they'll keep operating it and operating it, opening more and more bays. They anticipate that they'll have to open, about a dozen of these bays.
Yeah, and talking with, I believe you've talked to him too in the past. I know you read the book that John Barry wrote, Rising Tide, talking about the great Mississippi River flood of 1927, and he said all it takes is one little break, one crevice in the levee for that water to just keep going, and it's not going to stop. And we heard from the Major General that in 1927 the river was as wide as 80 miles. It's just so hard to comprehend. But in talking to John Barry last weekend, he said, as you said, from many engineers regard these Mississippi River levees as, if not the strongest, some of the strongest in the entire country. So, stronger than some of these 100-year protection levees that the Corps is building now to protect us from hurricanes.
Well, there's no question about that. The engineers I've talked to have put it this way, is that with the Mississippi River levees, you're talking about not the 100-year storm protection that we keep hearing about, but actually something in many places, in most places perhaps, that is more akin to 1,000-year protection. Now, here's the deal, though. I mean, if one of those levees were to go, and if there were a problem that were unnoticed and didn't get attention, and I'm not trying to alarm anybody, because I've actually tried to do the reverse by pointing out to people that the levees have survived every one of these tests. What is really different about this event is the time, the length, the duration that the event will last, the fact that the water will be that high for that long a period of time. But John Barry certainly knows a lot more about this subject than I, and he's absolutely right, based on everybody I've talked to. If you were to get a levee break on a river, you would have a limited period of time in which you could do something, and then after that, you'd have potentially an amount of water, if you had multiple breaks that in the city, that would make Katrina seem like, a rainstorm. No one I have talked to anticipates that happening. Everyone I have talked to who is experts, sometimes engineers who have been critical of the Corps of Engineers, have suggested to me that really what we're talking about here is very strong levees that have survived every test that they've had thrown at them since 1849. And I again get back to the point that what is unusual for New Orleans about the river height is the duration that the river will stay up, and the fact that they've got to use these devices to keep the river at that point. But we had high river water we had what we're experiencing now. When you look out on the Mississippi River and you get a little nervous maybe about the height of the river, we had that 3 years ago in New Orleans. And 26 times in New Orleans before this event, the river had gotten to flood stage of 17 feet. So
what you're saying is the difference now is that we've never seen it that high for as long as we're about to see it.
Well, certainly not in modern times, not since the Bonnie Carey came around, but we have had times when the river has gotten higher. I think what's interesting to note is that the Corps this time around is not allowing the river to stay up. The river could go to 18 or 19 feet, and I asked Major General Michael Walsh, about that specifically today, and he told me that it's their intention, or he certainly implied it's their intention to keep the river in New Orleans at about 17 feet. I think, and I'll put a little asterisk on this because I'm just kind of extrapolating. No one's told me this. It's just based on other things I've heard. My impression is that, they probably want to keep it at 17 feet because there is that amount of pressure on the river levees, and it'll be there for quite a period of time. But you're right. What is different about this event in New Orleans is that they have to run these devices to keep the river from getting any higher and the length of time.
And right now the Mississippi River's crest is still in Arkansas, so not expected to reach New Orleans for more than a week, and that kind of gives you an idea of how long we could be dealing with this. It's just very slow moving. Why is that?
It's just that amount of water. We did a story, I guess it was on April 5th, because I looked it up the other day, and the point of the story was that the Corps was doing a test, and they didn't anticipate having to run the spillway this year. And here we were just a couple of weeks later with kind of the red alert going up. They got a massive amount of rain in the kind of the middle Mississippi River Valley. And the thing that, the line I've used in the past is this is really the Ohio River we're looking at here. The Ohio River is a much more significant river at Cairo, Illinois, at the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi. 60% or more of the water comes down the Ohio. So when you get a lot of rain, as we did in mid-April in the Ohio River Valley, it is a dramatic amount of water. And this is actually the second highest volume of water in recorded history. The only other time we've seen more water than what we're experiencing today was the great 1927 flood you made reference to, that when the levees broke, water spread out for 80 miles. This is the biggest event in that time. It's not as big as that event, and we have had higher river crests in New Orleans since that event because the river, broke free of its levees farther up north. But those levees that broke in 1927 were not the beefy levees that we have today.
Well, and you mentioned the Ohio River and that river basin, and last night I was in Pierre Part in Assumption Parish where they were having a community meeting because they're expecting to see some floodwaters from backwater flooding, and the Army Corps of Engineers, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Jernigan, who was there, just trying to stress to them the tremendous amount of water coming down into our area. He talked about in the Ohio River Valley basin area that in mid-April or late April, in a 2 to 3 week period, they saw 1,000% more rainfall than they would normally receive. So all of that water, when you talk about tremendous amount of rainfall, I made sure he said it. I went back and listened to it. He said 1,000% more rainfall in that area. So just to kind of show you how much rain that has to flow back down this way.
And we all talked about what a trickle of water this would be today coming out of that one little bay that is opening. And I will tell you that as helicopters hover over this site, it's about a mile from end to end from where I am. I would say conservatively, in that little space of time of, what are we talking about, Shelley, 15 to 20 minutes now, they have got about a half a square mile of water that has pooled. So this is a structure that is more than 2 times the Bonnie Carey spillway in terms of its capacity. It is a massive amount of water by comparison, and we're seeing that with just this one tiny little bay, as the way it's been described. It's a lot of force. I was distracted there for a second as I saw a little bunny rabbit run out of the spillway and head for higher ground on the levee.
Wow, and there's going to be a lot of that, the wildlife. It's almost as if they know, what's happening, because Allison talked about in Butte La Rose, all of the deer running to get to higher ground.
Well, some of that because there is so much water that's going to come down the system. And here's an interesting point. One of the hot spots for black bear, the Louisiana black bear, in Louisiana, is which is species, a threatened species of the black bear species.